The horizon stretched out endlessly in every direction, a vast sea of white beneath a dome of piercing blue sky. There were no mountains, no trees, no signs of life, just an expanse of salt as far as the eye could see. The Bonneville Salt Flats were empty, a place where time seemed to lose meaning, and the world felt impossibly large, yet hauntingly lonely. Martin Hollowell sat alone on the salt, his body still and his eyes calm as they gazed at the endless nothingness before him. He had chosen this place for a reason. It was as isolated as one could be, a place where the world forgot you existed. It was exactly what he wanted. There was peace here, in the quiet and in the stark, otherworldly beauty of it all. He had driven out in his old truck, no particular destination in mind, but something about the salt flats had called to him. He parked the truck miles behind him, now a distant, inconsequential speck on the horizon. Now, he sat, cross-legged on the cold, hard surface, feeling the salt against his palms, the subtle crunch beneath his boots. His breathing was steady, slow. He wasn't in a hurry. Martin had always been a man at odds with the world, or maybe the world had been at odds with him. Life had a way of closing in on him, its expectations and demands forming invisible walls that pressed against him from every angle. He had tried to conform, tried to make peace with the relentless current of time, but in the end, he had found no comfort in it. He wasn't sure when he had first felt it, death's approach. It wasn't like the sudden shock of a terminal diagnosis, but rather a gradual understanding that his time was coming. A sense of inevitability had settled over him, and rather than resist it, Martin had embraced it. Death wasn't something to fear, not anymore. It was just the next step in a journey that had already taken him further than he ever wanted to go. He had no family left to mourn him, no friends close enough to notice his absence. There had been a time when he would have feared dying alone, when the thought of slipping away without a single person to remember him had filled him with dread. But that was before. Now, the idea of fading quietly, with only the salt flats as witness, felt like a release. The air was warm, but not stifling, and the ground beneath him was cool. The silence was deep, profound, a kind of silence that didn't exist in the world of men. Here, there was no hum of distant traffic, no chatter of voices, no planes cutting through the sky above. Just him, the salt, and the endless horizon. A soft breeze stirred, carrying with it a faint scent of minerals, the desert's breath. He closed his eyes and let the wind wash over him, feeling it tug at the loose strands of his hair. There was a sense of timelessness here, as though the world had stopped moving and he was the only thing left in it. And then, in the distance, a low rumble. Barely audible at first, just a tremor at the edge of his awareness. His eyes opened slowly, and he turned his head toward the sound. It was faint, but growing louder. Something was coming. At first, Martin thought it was an engine, a vehicle, maybe someone else out here on the flats. But as the sound intensified, it became clear that this was no engine. It was deeper, more resonant, like the groan of something ancient waking from a long slumber. The rumble grew, a vibration in the very air around him, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble slightly in response. He stood slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was nothing. Just the same endless stretch of salt. But the sound was unmistakable now, a rhythmic pounding, like the footsteps of a giant. Martin's heart quickened, but not with fear. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, a feeling that whatever was coming had been on its way for a long, long time. He didn't run. He didn't even move. He just stood there, waiting, as the sound grew louder, closer. The air shifted, a sudden, unnatural stillness falling over the flats. The wind stopped, the distant hum of the world faded, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then it appeared. A figure, far off on the horizon, barely more than a shadow against the glaring white of the salt. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it had all the time in the world. Martin watched, his heart steady, his breath calm, as the figure drew closer. It wasn't human. That much was clear. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs too long and its movements too fluid, like a creature made of smoke and shadow. As it approached, Martin could make out more details. Its body seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, its skin dark and slick like oil. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were black, empty voids that reflected nothing. It moved with the grace of a predator, but there was no malice in its approach. It was not here to kill. It was here to collect. Martin knew this without needing to be told. This was death. Not the abstract concept he had spent so long contemplating, but something real, tangible, standing before him in the flesh. It had taken many forms over the centuries, but here, on the salt flats, it had chosen this, an ancient thing, a being older than time itself, come to guide him across the threshold. The creature stopped a few feet in front of him, its head tilted slightly to the side as if studying him. Martin stared back, unblinking, unafraid. There was a deep sense of understanding between them, a wordless exchange that transcended language or thought. He had been waiting for this moment, and now it was here. The creature extended one long, bony arm, its fingers impossibly long, the tips brushing the air just in front of Martin's chest. There was no pain, no coldness, just a sensation of lightness, as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Martin felt his body relax, his muscles loosening, the tension that had been with him for so long melting away. His heartbeat slowed, the rhythm steady and calm. His breath came easier, each inhale and exhale softer than the last. The sun hung low in the sky now, casting long shadows across the salt. The horizon seemed to shimmer, the line between earth and sky blurring as the day drew to a close. The creature remained still, watching, waiting, as Martin's final breaths left his body. He smiled, a small, peaceful smile. There was no fear, no regret, just a quiet acceptance. This was the way it was meant to be. With one last breath, Martin closed his eyes. The warmth of the sun faded, the salt beneath him dissolving into nothingness, and the world around him slipped away, leaving only silence. The creature lingered for a moment longer, its dark eyes fixed on the place where Martin had stood. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked back across the flats, disappearing into the fading light. The Bonneville salt flats were empty once again, the vast expanse of white stretching out in every direction. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of minerals, and the world continued on, indifferent to the life that had just ended. And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, Martin was finally free.